for resources on the internet. And during that entire time, there's all this opportunity to have your messaging on that same screen. So what we'll look at is sort of what we've seen the performance for those in the past, and ways that you can utilize the MDR data set in an online manner to activate these educators as they really are working more and more online and with screen time. All right. And then, just expanding on the same concept. So digital is helping educators with their 2020-2021 school year planning. They're sourcing remote learning and resource materials. And I think, as we looked at some of what Doneen's team is doing, there's a lot of resources online for teachers so that they can have access to free resources, free trials as they're exploring how methodology for them to be able to bring their lessons to their students in an online manner, in a digital manner. It means that they're spending more time online. All right. So email marketing. We're going to start with email marketing. And I think that really email marketing, dollar for dollar, is the best method for one-to-one contact with prospects that you're going to find in today's marketing space. It's really cost effective. It allows for direct communication with prospects or customers, and it can be done in an incredibly data-driven way. So when I start talking about prospecting emails, specifically what I'm talking about is this idea that there's data online about educators, right? So if you're going after a specific subset of the education space, email is an activation channel for that data. And what it does is, because email is one-to-one, because there's so much data tied to an email address, it really allows for the leads that come out of email, whether you're just looking at someone who's opened or you're looking at people who have opened and or clicked. What you're going to find is that there's all these data attributes that then get attached to that email address. They get attached to that open, and they get attached to that click. So as an example, when MDR sends emails on behalf of our customers, we then deliver a file for all the openers, right? And on that file, you have the school they work at, the job title, what email campaign did they engage with, a phone number for that school, all of this sort of additional information beyond the email address that then allows for downstream activity. So a prospecting email campaign is incredibly valuable, not just because you're getting the one-to-one contact, but post-campaign, you're getting all this actionable data that you can then either send further email messaging to these records in a more concentrated way. So you know that they've opened, they've engaged with one of your messages. You can take them downstream via another email, or you can feed it to a sales team. You can feed it to an internal marketing group for audience creation and funnel management. There's really just a ton of activity that happens downstream of an email campaign when you do it sourced from a data set. Right. So this is prospecting email in terms of you're reaching out to new potential customers. And what you get back is just a data-driven lead that has so many action variables that you could take on it that it's really tremendous top of funnel marketing. So for 2019, we took over 6,000 email campaigns that we had delivered on behalf of customers. And we decided to just use this as a benchmarking opportunity. A lot of times I would be asked, Sean, what's a good benchmark for cold email in the education space? And I'd do the normal workflow. I'd go into Google and I'd start looking. I'd start trying to find white papers about it. And what I found was really there isn't any good source that's sending the volume of email that we were sending, and that was sending sort of through the quality of IP address. There's a lot of distributed emailing going on, whether you lease an email list and you send it yourself, or you're only dealing with customer lists, which you can't really compare direct prospecting email to a customer list. So we decided we're going to set our own benchmark because we're doing a tremendous amount of email volume. There isn't this content out there in the world today. So what we need to do is let's set a benchmark. I want something that our customers can measure themselves against so that you have a target to hit, and then to grow beyond as you hit that target, you can start setting new targets above it. So we sent over 6,000 email campaigns in 2019. The average campaign size, so the average delivered emails in one of those campaigns was just over 15,000. And the average unique open rate for those campaigns was 5.21%. All right. And as we talk through some of this data, we'll hit some notes on definitions here. So open rate is going to be the relationship of the total opens, so every open that happened on a campaign, and the delivered emails. So somebody can open the campaign 5 times. If you're just calculating an open rate, all of those 5 opens will be included in that rate. We then like to look at unique open rates. So a unique open rate is going to be the relationship between unique opens and delivered emails. And the reason I tend towards unique rates, and we'll see this similar in Facebook when we start looking at that later, is because a unique open rate from a data-driven email list is measurement of distinct audience reach. And that's what refers to how many unique individuals engage with your messages. And then on the next slide, we're going to look at typically for the MDR customer base, what's the audience penetration they see doing email in a year's time. All right. So through the average frequency, the average number of emails that we saw a customer send in a 12-month time period during 2019 was 3 to any one individual. And the average distinct audience reach, so from the total audience they decided to email, on average, we saw our customers reaching about 6.17% of the unique individuals in that year's time. What was really interesting is when people started sending trigger campaigns, and now we'll get a little bit into the weeds of how we manage our email campaigns, but a trigger is going to be if somebody doesn't open the first email, automatically sending them a second email, and you can do that up to 3 emails. We saw a drastic increase in the distinct audience reach, all the way up to 7.93%. So that means on average, customers doing trigger marketing were reaching just under 8% of their total target in 2019. All right, and we tend to use narrowly defined audiences, right? So what we'll see is there's a very specific group of teachers that may be interested in one product line. Great, let's pull those teachers from the database. Let's email them a few times. We'll get great reach into that audience, and you'll get great engagement and downstream leads coming out of those email sends. All right, this, don't have to spend a ton of time on this slide, but this is just sort of a monthly look at the email traffic that we were delivering in 2019. So the orange bars are the percent of total delivered. You could see that we have spring, we have one level of peak deployment, and then going into the fall, we have our next level of peak deployment. So we see some school planning time, we see purchasing time, we see that people are getting back into school. There's a huge amount of email volume going out to the educators that are starting up their school year. What's interesting also, though, is that the blue is the average unique open rate, and that tends to be pretty consistent. We see some spikes like March and June, but overall, the open rates are very steady. And that's something that we've seen also during 2020, is that it's a pretty strong foundation, email as a channel, in terms of, people working from home, people going into the office. It doesn't disrupt the average open rates tremendously. It's a very solid channel with really consistent delivery. This is maybe a little bit in the weeds also, but we're going to look at a little bit of line of business performance. And again, with the idea of benchmarking. So all businesses are not the same when it comes to marketing. Certain types of groups tend to have higher engagement in email marketing. Like you'll see here, college publishers have an average unique open rate of 7.58%. And they also, if you look at the middle column, they tend to send smaller campaigns. So we're showing the average delivered per campaign in that middle column. And you'll see like something like consumer products on average is sending 38,000 emails per campaign, whereas college publishers on average are sending 3,000. So depending on what your messaging is, what line of business you're in, now we can get a little bit one step deeper into the how do you compare, what's a good benchmark for you to set for yourself. So for example, professional development, average unique open rate in 2019 was 2.73%. Meanwhile, you could look at something like construction or consumer products, they were over 6.6%. Right? So find sort of where your business falls into this chart, and you can start to measure yourself against your peers. And then with the goal of not just reaching that number, but exceeding it. I always like to think of the benchmarking as, hey, this is where the industry was at. You're going to shoot for over that. And then you have your own new personal benchmark that next year you tend to shoot over again. All right. So some takeaways for this, you know, benchmark yourself against the industry, benchmark yourself against your peers, right? And always try to achieve higher than that, but use it to set some expectations. So if you're used to sending customer emails, right? So you're in MailChimp, you're sending customer emails, you're getting 24% open rate. You know, these are people who've already opted into hearing from you and are used to receiving your messaging. When you move into the prospecting email space, it's a completely different world, right? So you don't want to have the expectations that you have sending customer emails when you step into a third party or a prospecting email world. Really, you want to start to set new expectations for people who may not know your company, may not be expecting an email from you, and then set the bar for those, and then something to achieve. All right, campaign response will vary by title, and we don't really get into the titles in this condensed version of the report. We will have the report available for everyone to download after the presentation, but certain job titles outperform others. Like we've found guidance counselors often get included alongside other job titles within a school, and they're very responsive across almost all the messaging, right? Otherwise, principals are similarly included across many different groups that are emailed, and their response tends to end to the lower side. So I think measuring by job title, measuring by industry, and constantly working on your offer will help not only set the expectations, but exceed the expectations. All right, we have some best practices here. I just pick out a couple because I'm going slower than I'm supposed to be. So segmenting your audience, I think if you have a data set to pick from, it doesn't hurt to send more campaigns, right? So we say here segment to fewer than 50,000. We see the example of college publishers are sending on average 3,000, and they're our highest performing group. I think the more you could segment your audience, it creates greater opportunity to speak to that audience specifically, right? So you'll see on the right here, we have very specific subject lines, trend to higher performance. One way that you can keep your messaging very specific is by taking your target to a very specific level. So even if you have multiple groups within a school that you feel like your product would be appropriate for, but the message might be slightly different for each, that's okay, right? Create smaller lists, send more campaigns in terms of volume of total number of sends, but take the opportunity to be more specific to each audience. And every time we see specificity, acronyms specific to acronyms for a specific state standard, for example, perform very well. So take the opportunity to segment, to be specific, and then really sort of be consistent too. So if you're using branding in, say, a Facebook ad, which we'll talk about next, keep that branding in your email. If you're using an image in that Facebook ad, use in that image or a similar image in your email, right? Use the same language and take the data-driven marketing. What data-driven marketing allows for you to do is, you're going to the same audience, keeping consistency across that audience, across your email campaigns with specificity will really allow for higher results. So targeted Facebook advertising, same concept. Pick your audience, right? So we're starting with educator audience, and then bring that audience online into Facebook. Bring your messaging online into Facebook. Facebook is tremendously popular. We've seen in 2020, the engagement of Facebook has only gone up. People are really active in the platform, and the Facebook developers behind the scenes are constantly working to make it a very engaging place. Having a very engaging place that your users are in is a great way to generate clicks on your ads. All right. And we also know that Facebook is the most popular channel with educators, social channel. So the average Facebook campaign, again, benchmarking, because when we go out into the world and we go out into Google, we can't really find a strong benchmark specific to what we do, specific to education marketing. So we're setting a little bit of a benchmark here. So the first thing is that the average Facebook campaign we served was around 66,000 impressions, which if you start comparing to consumer marketing, it's very small, right? Very focused. The average number of people reached within those campaigns was 14.7 thousand. So we have a very high frequency. The average frequency for our campaigns was 6.83 ads served to any one individual throughout a campaign. That is a very high rate of frequency. Our total click-through rate was 0.64, but going to the unique level, because this is really where I like to live in the data-driven marketing space, the average unique CTR in Facebook ad campaigns that we served 2019 was 2.69%. And the unique CTR in Facebook is going to be similar to the audience penetration metric we looked at for email. This is measuring the number of unique individuals that were served the ad that clicked through. So on average, for a Facebook ad campaign that we're serving to a data-driven audience, we have a 2.69% of that audience is clicking through on the ad. What's really neat, because we're in an engaging space, in the social space, is that when you use video, we actually see these numbers jump. So the total CTR, which is just total clicks by total impressions, using video jumps to 0.75%, and the unique CTR goes up a full percentage point to 3.69% when you include video in your ad. Top performing placements. Facebook newsfeed is king in Facebook advertising. It's a little bit more expensive, I'll say, because there's a lot of competition for that space in someone's newsfeed. But the Facebook newsfeed performs very well, and I believe we have a chart coming up next that demonstrates that performance. But I would say Facebook newsfeed is king when it comes to Facebook advertising. Right column does well. Right column especially does well when you start looking at sort of cost of click, because it's a less expensive space. But when users on the desktop, it stands out a little bit because it's not part of the general newsfeed. It's sort of included to the right. And then another interesting part about Facebook is this external app. So this is like the Facebook Partner Network. So apps and websites that have users sign in with their Facebook account also have the opportunity to open the advertising up within their space. So we see a lot of third-party apps that partner with Facebook. So all of a sudden, the Facebook audience that we've created from our database, it becomes available in a much wider array of advertising on people's phones. And that was the third highest performing area that we actually served Facebook ads last year. So stay central to be seen. I think really what this is about is that the engagement is highest in the Facebook newsfeed. It's a little bit more expensive. It's a very contested area because all the advertisers want to be there because the performance is so strong. But there's other options within Facebook advertising to sort of reduce or allow for less cost per click opportunities, like the audience network, the right-hand column. But what's best about the Facebook advertising, I would say, is that you're getting in front of these audiences on their time. So, typically the way we like to think about it is that during the day, people are engaging with email quite a bit. At night, they may be sitting on their couch, browsing Facebook on their phone. That is a great time to generate interest in that audience because they have time to take action. We see Facebook viewership, actually, you see quite a bit of it during the day, but Facebook engagement shoots up at night after around dinner time when people sort of have time to themselves or they have time to engage with content on their phone. That's where we see Facebook advertising engagement really take off. And it's a great opportunity to sort of be in their hand. So email, oftentimes is engaged with in a professional manner, but Facebook, you're getting these people sort of off the clock. It's a great way to be in front of them too when they're engaged on something on their device. So, best practice, let's just grab one. This actually is a really good one to pick at random. So show them that you know them. So content really should be focused on the audience. That's, again, just similar to email where who your audience is, because when you're doing data-driven marketing, you're sort of picking them, right? And use that as an opportunity to bring them appropriate content. So what do I mean by that? If you know your audience includes science teachers, put science teachers in the headline, right? Have your ad image include something about, include a science teacher. I think that's a really important thing to remember, that depending on how your audience is generated, you may know more or less about them. The way that the advertising that we work with is generated is we know exactly who the audience is before we bring them online, and it creates this really great opportunity to speak right to that audience. All right, display advertising. Display advertising, very similar to the Facebook advertising, except it's a lot more of a billboard than it is an engagement play. So display advertising, we're going to be across the web on thousands of different websites. It really depends on where the users are. So data-driven targeting, again, it's a very consistent theme for each of these channels. And the concept is that we're serving ads on thousands of websites only when the audience is there. So somebody's on CNN.com, there's an advertising opportunity if they're part of our group. So let's take a deeper look at this. These are the top 3 performing ads, and we do the IAB standard ad sizes, so 300 by 250, 728 by 90, 160 by 600. We also serve a 180 by 150, but it isn't very commonly served. It's not a widely used size. So, and this image really just helps sort of convey the message here that these are just your traditional display ads. I will say the 300 by 250 is also served in-app on mobile devices. So we'll see in a second, it gets a large portion of the impressions we serve. But standard display advertising across the web in a data-driven fashion. So here's the percentage of impressions served. So 61% of the impressions that we served in 2019 were to the 300 by 250 size. And that's on web and mobile device. With the next highest being that leaderboard ad, the 728 by 90 served 28% of our impressions. And the 160 by 600, the skyscraper, was 11% of the impressions. You'll see that the leaderboard and the skyscraper performed very well. So they had a 0.52% click-through rate on average last year, which is huge. When we start to look, we go into our Google and we start to look up the average display advertising performance metrics, the number that is most frequently cited as the average click-through for display ads is 0.08. So it's even in our lowest performing ad size, the 300 by 250, we are 3x the average display advertising click size. And that's really a function of how we target the audiences. We start with our database, we pick the perfect audience, we bring that audience online, and then we target it for advertising. And the performance numbers really show that that's effective. Top apps where we actually serve these ads. So you'll see that we're getting a ton of ads served in games on people's mobile devices. And these are pretty popular games, Sudoku, Solitaire, Words with Friends. Actually, 2 versions of Words with Friends made the top 20. Jigsaw puzzles. And this is really great because now all of a sudden, again, somebody's holding their phone, they're playing a game on their phone, and they're getting served a relevant advertisement to their profession, right? While they have time to engage with it if they find it interesting. Then we go, the next most popular type of app we're serving in would be like the entertainment style. This is where we have the Chive and MyFitnessPal, and sort of like, again, people are on their devices, they're using them for their daily lives, and they're getting served relevant advertising. And then we had one popular news site app sort of make our top 20, and that was the Fox News app. I apologize, my computer is beeping. I skipped a slide. So display advertisement best practices. I think what you'll find, and I believe we're sharing this presentation with the audience, there's a lot of really similar best practices that you'll see across each of these channels. I think know your target audience. That's something that I consistently lean on as the best practice in almost any review I'm doing for a customer, whether we're looking at the Facebook ads they served, whether we're looking at the emails that they sent, or the display ad campaigns that they ran. Speaking to your audience is an awesome function of knowing who your audience is, right? So starting with an offline audience, bringing that audience online, and then targeting them through email, Facebook, or display ads creates this great opportunity to really let them know you know their needs and you have a great way to solve their needs. I think when we get into a specific best practice for the display ads, it's really about simple, strong message, right? You want a clear image. You want a design that sort of drives the user to click through on that image. It's very similar to postcards, right? Where you have, if you have motion in the ad, have the motion point towards your button. Use very strong, simple language and take that brief moment of opportunity you have during their web scrolling or while they're playing a game on their phone. Take that quick moment to inspire them to click through. All right. As a summary, digital marketing, especially this year, from the data-driven audience is an awesome opportunity for ROI, right? It tends to be lower investment, higher return, especially if you're talking about something like email where you're getting this huge data set attached to an email open. Increasing the noise in digital channels makes aligning with educator behavior and best practices a requirement for success. I think, I almost use the wrong word here in terms of noise. It's like you want to be prevalent in a teacher's online life. So if they're on the Chive on their phone, they're engaging with your brand. If they're on Facebook, they're engaging with your brand. When they're in their email inbox, they're engaging with your brand. I think increasing how frequently they see even just your logo, right? It increases the chances of down the line engagement with you because you become familiar. And then analyzing performance data can keep you ahead. And that's something that I really enjoy doing on behalf of customers. And it's something that I find that the people who pay attention to campaign performance, the people who are looking and always sort of saying, okay, well, that subject line performed really well and that email body performed very well. Let's put them together. Let's see how they perform together. Let's send another test, right? Testing and learning is probably the most important part of digital marketing. And because of, we're in an agile space in digital marketing, it's easy to turn things around, right? It's easy to test, to learn, to try again, to set up a new campaign. It's a very agile, quick moving area. And with that, do we have time for questions?
Yeah, I think we could probably.
We could extend a little bit.
7 minutes before the next session.
Okay.
So for those who could stick around during the break, why not? Sean, you talked a lot about open rates versus click-through rates. Can you talk about the importance of open rates and why you recommend paying attention to them?
Sure. Open rates are really important because, first of all, you can't generate a click without an open. And an open rate is really that first layer of engagement in email. So it's important for those reasons, right? So an open means that A, your subject line worked, right? You were able to generate enough interest that you got somebody to open your email. And then B, once you get that open, there's a second opportunity to then generate a click to your website. The other reason that, for me, open rates work is they create a flag, we'll call it. It's an interest indicator that somebody opened your email. So let's say post-campaign, you have 1,000 people who opened your email and they didn't click. That's, to me, is an interest indicator that those 1,000 people might need just another email deployment. Maybe they need a direct mail piece. Maybe they need a phone call, right? Maybe there's a visit directly to the institution that they work at. Opens are a great interest indicator, especially in the email space, because you have all these other elements about an individual that you emailed that you can then use that interest indicator to drive further down funnel marketing.
Thank you. And as you were talking about that, you talked about multiple other channels, right? So as you were going through the deck, we heard about email performance and trends, ad performance and trends, social ad performance and trends, and performance and trends. And in your example or in your response about open rates, you talked about how these channels can work together. Do you have a tip or a suggestion of how best to use email and digital advertising together?
Sure. So what I like to prescribe for someone who's looking to use the channels together is I tend to suggest bubble wrapping your email. And what I mean by that is, you start your advertisement engagements early. So a week before you start emailing, 2 weeks before you start emailing, you start sort of softening that email audience up with your advertising. Right now, you might convert some people before the email's ever sent, but also what you're doing is you're building familiarity with your brand, with your messaging. You're creating this sort of notion of familiarity so that when the email lands in the inbox, people are more likely to then engage with that email, because it's not just a cold email coming from a company they don't know. It's an email coming from a company that they start to know, that it's about an offer that they've become familiar with online that maybe they haven't clicked, they haven't engaged. And the other thing I really like to suggest is that if you have the opportunity to do all of these channels from one data source, that ultimately you can really build consistency in your audience, which means that you can have incredibly consistent messaging, incredibly consistent branding, all to one group. So, I end up being agnostic as to where they click from, right? So if they convert from a web ad, great. If they convert from an email, great. But ultimately what you do is you start to create all these conversion opportunities in multiple channels to the same audience.
Thanks, Sean. Great advice. Ad first, email to follow. In 3 minutes or less, one last question I'll just toss off there. The question is, are there issues with emails getting through a school system email? So I think probably email provider. And what can I do to mitigate these challenges?
Sure. Yeah, I think ultimately when you start doing prospecting email, you'll start sending into many different email service providers at many different institutions. And ultimately, yeah, there can be issues with that. I think there's a few different steps to take and then maybe the side path. So you can send engaging content first, right? So maybe this is where the content marketing starts to play more of a role. So if you find that there's a school system where it's difficult to get an open, right, you suspect you may not be in the inbox. The best thing that you could do to work with sort of the AI that's managing what gets into people's inboxes these days is to get engagement. We used to point people away from words, right? Don't say free, because there's a word filter within the person's ESP that filters out free. But those days are long gone. And really now it's about, hey, this person emailed 1,000 people in our server. How many of those people engaged with the email, right? So getting engagement is really the first step to getting better inbox placement, and then getting into maybe some of those tougher to crack ESPs that schools provide. The other piece is that there's some school districts out there that don't allow any email into their email server that isn't part of their internal environment. And in those cases, or if let's say you are doing email marketing today to schools and there's a group that you just cannot get engagement from, ultimately what I suggest is take those emails, take that group of individuals, and maybe create a Facebook audience out of them, and then start trying to market to them in other channels, right? You can continue to send small batch emails into that group to try to get engagement. Or what you can do, or simultaneously build a social audience, build a display ad audience, send a direct mail campaign, right? And start taking alternate routes into some of those harder nuts to crack as far as school email servers, right? Don't give up on them. Just take another path.
Thank you so much, Sean. As always, I learn a ton by listening to you. Just want to reiterate, I know we had a couple questions about sharing these slides, and we will be sending them out after the fact. So thanks, everybody. I know we're running a couple minutes behind schedule right now. So we're just going to take a quick 2-minute break to switch presenters, and we will be back at 3:02 Eastern time to start up the next session. Thanks so much, Sean.
Thanks, everyone.